And it's time for our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should we scrap HS2 to fill the financial black hole? Now, HS2 is the UK's government attempt at levelling up transport. Now, the new line is actually aimed to connect the north and the south of England. That's going from the West Midlands to Manchester, Birmingham and then London. And a report conducted by engineering experts actually revealed that the Birmingham to Manchester leg could reach a staggering £40 billion, which is almost double the original estimate, all by 2014. Now, this comes as the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, indicated that tough decisions will be taken as he aims to cover a £50 billion black hole. One of those decisions, I think they were talking about raiding the pensions, which I didn't like the sound of. And with public finances threatened to be cut, whilst taxes are also being raised, the Conservative MP Greg Smith argued that scrapping HS2 could solve virtually all the Treasury's problems right now. And with COVID-19 leading to fewer people taking trains, is now really the time to be investing in such a project? So I'm asking this hour, is it time to scrap HS2 to fill the financial black hole? I'm joined now by former Minister for Europe, Dennis McShane. Dennis, what do you think? Should they scrap it? 40 billion for this particular thing?
And someone who was an MP in South Yorkshire for 20 years. This is outrageous. It's the south of England. It's Sunak, England. He wouldn't even notice 40 billion out of his personal wealth. Demolishing all the hopes.
I don't think he's that rich.
Well, I'll leave that to you, Dana. All the hopes of firms, people who've trained up, engineers, staff, to give us what the French and the Germans have had for 20 years, some decent high-speed rail. Avanti, you've heard about that, this joke of a railway line. It's a disgrace. The World Economic Forum has just produced its annual report on the state of world railways. We are 29th between, wait for it, Kazakhstan and India.
So what are you saying? We shouldn't scrap it?
Why? Because to give some hope finally back to the north of England, because when you have proper transport links, like Eisenhower built the highways in America in the 1950s and 60s, France has got its TGV, Train à grande vitesse, the Germans have got a high-speed train, other countries have, and we're lumbering along with these Avantis who are just cancelling services, 3-4 hour journey times, and I mean, everybody in the north. GBNews is a national station. It's not London news. And I'm not being critical of GB News. You know, I love you. But speak for the North and stop speaking for all these rich Tories.
No, I'm not speaking for them at all. I'm asking a question. I personally think that actually, in a sense, I think there's parts of it they should scrap. I think there are definitely parts of it that should be scrapped.
The bits between Birmingham and Stafford? And you get into a bus replacement service?
No, I think that they should try and repurpose some of the existing infrastructure that they currently have. That they've closed. They closed off a lot of train stations in those areas as well. So I think they could reinvest in that area. Some of them...
Those are very small 19th century lines. Are built under completely different conditions. We're talking about trains going at 250 miles an hour. So you can wake up in the morning and say, hey, there's a business opportunity for me in Manchester or maybe in Leeds, even in Rotherham.
But listen, the trains, people aren't going up and down the country like these. Well, I'll tell you what, let's bring on, because I'm also joined by Conservative MP for Wokingham, John Redwood. John, thank you very much for joining me. What's your view on this then? The costs of HS2 have consistently been proven to be well underestimated. And according to this report, it predicts that the second leg of the project from Birmingham to Manchester is likely to reach 40 million, so almost double. Do you think it's time they sort of considered scrapping this thing?
Well, first thing I would challenge is this idea of the 50 billion black hole. I think the Treasury and OBR advice that seems to be leaking into the press is wrong and bad advice. I believe this is about an alleged deficit in 2025. I don't think the OBR, any more than anybody else, has any idea what the deficit is going to be in 2025. And so I would say this is not the way to conduct these discussions. I don't think we should have tax rises in a couple of weeks' time. And I think we do need to get better value for money in some of our spending. But my first cut would be in the 11 billion, which the government wishes to send to the Bank of England in order to allow it to take very big losses on bonds that it bought at very expensive prices quite recently. I think that would be quite wrong. I don't think there's any need to sell those bonds. And so my first saving would be 11 billion off the programme to finance the Bank of England. As to the railway line, I voted against it originally. The business case was always very weak. It rested upon diverting quite a lot of travellers from the existing lines, which would have undermined their business proposition. There was never a huge case north of Birmingham on capacity. There's even less of a case on capacity now because, of course, post-COVID, rail travel, passenger travel is well down, and so the capacity issue is even more remote. So I think they should review that part of the project, and the cost increases are quite alarming.
Well, I'd like to bring Dennis back in on this to respond to that. Dennis, you heard what John said. He said basically there doesn't seem to be a case for this additional transport anyway. So especially post-COVID, people simply aren't really going on trains that much.
Well, look, in that case, why are people outraged at the cutting of the Avanti services? I appreciate John, and the earlier points he made are perfectly valid ones. I'm not going to get into many of his great areas of expertise. I think this case for massive cuts is wrong. I think what Rishi Sunak is basically the bankers and the Bank of England's man and Goldman Sachs' man in number 10, and he wants to impose IMF conditionality, International Monetary Fund conditionality on Britain without going to Washington for a begging bowl. But that always has been bad news for any country as essential services get cut. And I go back to HS2. I simply would plead with John from maybe the rolling hills and the golf courses of Wokingham. He doesn't see any need for the North to grow, but I was an MP for there 20 years. My daughter lives in Sheffield, see her a lot. The north of England's had a raw deal under all governments, not just, you can bash Tories if you like, and our country is unbalanced. And one reason is our transport communications are so weak and so slow. It's perfectly true you can get on TransPennine, stop at 40 stations between Sheffield and Liverpool and arrive there about as quick as you'd get to kind of Canada.
Well, I want to give John a chance to respond to that, actually.
Well, I'm very disappointed by GBNews that you're going in for this silly political knockabout instead of letting us discuss the things that the other channels won't discuss. I've never said that the North shouldn't grow. I'm very keen on the North growing. I think too much investment in new housing and jobs comes into an area like mine, and we need to spread that more widely around the country. And as you do that, of course, you need to upgrade the transport links, but you need to do it proportionate to the demand and the capacity. And I suspect there are many projects that are closer to fruition throughout the North, where I would be very keen to finance them, because I want results in the next 2 or 3 years, not in 15 years' time, for a project where the business case was always very weak indeed. And I know my colleagues in the North, quite a lot of them want to see improvements to their existing routes where they've got stations, because, of course, the truth about this very fast line is that very few places will be able to access it, because in order to have very fast running trains, they can't stop in many places. And so many places will have all the noise and disruption, but they won't have any of the benefit of being able to get on the train.
Well, listen, John, don't be worried, because we will discuss it. We are going to discuss it in depth after this. But thank you so much for joining me. That's John Wedwood and also Dennis McShane. Thank you so much for joining me. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. Let's have a quick look at what you've been saying. Darren says HS2 needs to be scrapped as soon as possible. Not only is it a waste of money, it's the government's vanity project. Put money into actual communities instead. Chris says cancelling HS2 today could save precisely nothing. A, that's because now has not how commission works, and B, because it takes years to wind down sites across the country. Half-built bridges left dangling and vehicle half buried. To claim cancelling HS2 would help the economy now is absurd. David says scrap it. HS2 is a £120 billion answer to a problem we don't have. Getting from London to Birmingham 20 minutes faster than a commuter can already is not worth this obscene cost and terrible environmental damage. Well, those are the thoughts of those watching and listening